Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the author series on the Success Insight podcast. Our guest today is Scott Spires. Scott is a translator, a linguist, writer, and editor based in the Chicagoland area. His short story, Everest, was a finalist in the Terrain.org 7th annual contest in fiction. And we are excited to have Scott join us today on the author series to chat about his new book, Abandon All Hope. Now, that's a very foreboding title, and I'm excited to hear more about it. So, Scott, welcome to the author series on the Success Insight podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Howard.
Now, before we get into the book and this title and where this came from, I would love if you could share, and I realize this could be an entire episode or multiple episodes in their own right, if we would talk a little bit about your background, because you've done a lot. And I think it's important because that's kind of been the context which helped to create this new book of yours. So share a little bit about your story.
Well, to begin with, I was born halfway around the world in New Delhi, India. And that's because my father was stationed at the US Embassy there. And since then, I've lived in a lot of different places. I was brought up as an Army brat. That means we lived in Argentina for 3 years, and we lived in various parts of the United States, including Army bases, Fort Riley, Fort Leavenworth, the New Orleans area, Indianapolis. But I have spent more of my life in the Chicago area than anywhere else. And I've lived and studied in foreign countries as an adult, in Britain, in the Czech Republic, and most recently in Russia. I lived in Moscow for several years, and that's where I met my wife, actually. And we got married over there and moved back to the United States in 2012, settling in the Chicago area for both personal and professional reasons. And that was the time that I went freelance as a translator, specializing in legal and business translation. And I've been doing that ever since.
Excellent. And a question that I will ask you, we can ask it now, we can answer it now, but when you go freelance, I mean, that means you're a business owner, an entrepreneur in your own right, which has its challenges versus having the quote unquote job where somebody's giving you a consistent paycheck. And how was that transition for you to go from the paycheck to being responsible for your own health, Maslow's hierarchy of safety, security needs, et cetera?
Well, in Moscow, I was working on staff for Baker & McKenzie, the law firm. I was a staff translator, so it was a regular job. And I actually still work for them occasionally. They're one of my clients. But when I went freelance, the first thing you notice is your workload is going to fluctuate, and you're going to have good weeks and bad weeks, and you're going to have some weeks where there is no work at all. So you've got to be marketing yourself somehow. The most valuable tool in getting work for me, in addition to personal contacts, was my membership in the American Translators Association, because potential clients scan those listings to find translators for their projects. And I've gotten some good continuous jobs from them. Since I went freelance, also, I do most of my work for agencies, translation agencies who are essentially middlemen or translation brokers. The client hires them and they find the translator.
Sure.
Most of these companies can be based in the US or in Europe, and that brings its own set of challenges because you become dependent on them. And sometimes they don't have very much, sometimes they have a lot. And there's another issue that I'm going to get into in a little bit, which is automation and the effect that it's having on translation. But So the ATA membership was probably the single most important thing in getting me jobs. And I had kind of a social safety net because my wife has the traditional full-time corporate job. So I get, the health insurance and the steady, not fluctuating salary through her.
So how did you begin to take on this moniker of writer author? Because I mean, you're writing a lot, the linguistic, the translation work, so you're writing for a living. But when did the stories start to coalesce for you that they became a product? And when we alluded to Everest, which was a finalist back in 2017, but had you been writing before that, had a notebook? How was that starting to come about for you?
Well, that's another case of something that I've been doing most of my life, which tends to fluctuate and go through distinct phases. I was always verbal. I was writing stories as a kid and in high school. I didn't have ever a job, though, which could be described as writer. I just used my writing skills in such jobs. And then when I had the time or the inspiration, I would take on independent projects, which would usually be some form of creative writing. But to give an example, I used to work for Berlitz International, the language teaching company.
Yeah.
So I was working in their curriculum development department, putting together teaching materials. And that, of course, is a lot of writing and editing. And managing of writers was one of the things that I did. But at the same time, I was doing things like I was going to writers' groups, taking part in them, and just doing some creative writing on the side, writing short stories mainly. And at the same time,
there's Max. He's a feature of the podcast. All right.
Okay. Yeah. So like the dogs have passed and
okay.
And so I was participating in writers groups, writing short stories and things like that, and actually getting some of them published. I also did some journalism. For example, I was living in Prague in 2001, 2002, and one of my jobs was to write about the Czech beer industry, which is a very important thing. I'm a huge fan of craft beer, and Prague is sort of the holy city for beer lovers. So I was writing about that, and I was also writing about other fields like insurance and professional services, which was not as interesting, but I did get to write about beer. And I also wrote for an alternative weekly, which both of these papers are now defunct. This was a long time ago, but I got to exercise more of a artistic and human interest angle there. I wrote book reviews, I wrote sort of culture articles and the like.
Sure.
So I've been writing in some capacity for most of my life, whether it's been practical and work related or creative. So it's not something that started recently, although with the publication of my novel, this is the single biggest thing that I've done.
Sure. Now I have to ask this question, and I'm asking this because one of my guests on an earlier podcast on the author series shared this. Actually was not the author series, it was our outdoor adventure series. She loves writing. She's a photographer, outdoor adventurist. She used to write papers for her peers in school. So did you ever write papers for your classmates?
No. I never did that. I mean, I realize some people have made a business of it. It is, it's sort of the dirty secret of academia. That you can hire these people to write papers for you. But
Okay.
I never actually.
Okay. I just thought I would ask because she brought it up. I did ask her, was this a side hustle for you back in high school? And she said, no, I just did it for fun. So you've had this creative bent, and I love the fact that you were joining writers groups, and because I imagine that's a wonderful way to get feedback on how you're doing, or, because you present this story and then, we think it's our baby, it's perfect. And then we get some feedback, and hopefully feedback in a truthful and kind sort of way. How was that experience as you're starting to kind of hone your skill as a creative writer?
I have to say it really depends. I actually wrote a blog post on the importance of writers groups, so you can check that out because that's where I linked my story Everest to. But in short, it really depends who's giving the feedback and in what sort of situation, because I've been in various writers groups and there was only one that I thought was unambiguously positive in giving me useful criticism. Other writers groups, either there was a certain mismatch between the people involved, like they were doing different things, and maybe the people who were critiquing their work were not the ideal audience for it, or some groups were constituted essentially as self-affirmation exercises where you would read your work and everybody else would applaud and say how nice it is. But obviously this is not a way to improve your work, because if you're writing seriously, you have to know that criticism is part of the game, and you are only going to improve if people criticize you. And there was one group that I attended. It was run by a guy named Paul Wolf, who was a published writer, had many stories and a couple of novels out. And it wasn't his day job. He was a teacher. But while he took it very seriously as a hobby, and he ran a very serious, rather stringent writers group. And I learned an awful lot in that group.
Is this group still around, or is it, defunct now?
It's defunct because Paul Wolf, the founder, died in 2008.
Oh, okay.
So,
okay.
yeah. So that's scattered to the winds, but it was the only writers group that really did me any good, I would say.
Okay. Now, are you still a part of a writers group today? Do you run one?
No, I don't. I've thought occasionally about starting one or about getting back into it, but circumstances are not favorable right now, partly because of COVID, but also because of things like transportation, and because I think we would have to define the purpose of the group rather strictly, and I haven't come up with a purpose yet.
Okay, fair enough.
We're only doing fiction writing, long form fiction writing, and only come here if you can stand being criticized, for example, and that excludes a lot of people.
I can imagine. Giving feedback is a skill. It's sometimes I just received feedback yesterday from a review of a LinkedIn profile audit. So it's like, okay, thank you very much. Now I'll go back and review what I wrote. But yeah, you got to be able to accept the truthfulness and kindness. So before we get into Abandon All Hope, tell us a little bit about Everest, because again, as I was prepping for the show, I was on your website and the blogging, and I did have an opportunity to find Everest and read it. And how did that come about?
Believe it or not, it actually started with a dream that I had. I dreamed that I could fly. I was wondering what I could do with that gift. I don't remember many more specifics of the dream because that's the nature of dreams. But when I got up, I thought, this is an interesting idea for a story, to bestow a gift on a character which we would normally think of as magical. And how do you react to that? How do you begin using it or not, as the case may be? And I also liked the idea of writing the story in such a way that it could be read either as a fantasy or hallucination on the part of this character, or as a straight fantasy story, that you're meant to take seriously as you're reading it. I think it's possible to interpret it both ways.
What I loved about it is, the protagonist in the story, all of a sudden this gift just appears, and he's kind of like, what's going on here?
Yeah, it just appears to him, it's given to him. Sometimes in life, things like this happen, and I was making a sort of fantastic metaphor out of it, you could say. It's like, what do we do with these, these amazing things that might suddenly come to us unexpectedly?
Excellent. And I did like the old man and his stick. I thought that was special. That was special. So, Abandon All Hope. How did this novel start to come about for you? I mean, it reminded me. Number one, I actually knew this was on the door frame of in Dante's Inferno, I guess the path to hell. So I did know that. So I think I get a gold star for that. But it reminded me of some other novels, and I think you talked about it in one of your blog posts. The movie, maybe it was a book too, High Fidelity. There was a movie, Office Space, and all I remember is the red swing line stapler on. I forget the character's dad, what his name was, and Milton. And there's also the book Generation X by Douglas Coupland, yes, and the veal fattening pen. And I've always remembered veal fattening pen. So Abandon All Hope, I think, is an interesting title for a book. And so share a little bit about, how this book came about and where, and because this is in some ways some stories from your life experience, but then bringing this together into a book. How'd that come about?
Well, I mentioned earlier that I used to live in Prague back in 2002 when I was writing about the Czech beer industry, and I was also writing in general. And that was when I came up with the idea of the book and wrote some initial sketches, because I had been laid off a job a couple of years previously, and it was your standard kind of office job. And I thought, I've got enough material from this job and from other jobs I've had to do a nice satirical novel out of it. And so I tested it. I wrote some episodes. I had to create characters, of course, and I came up with the idea of contrasting protagonists who would have a similar background. Both grew up in the suburbs, had that usual background, but they were taking completely opposite approaches to life. And so I wrote about half the book at that time. But the funny thing was, it lacked direction, it lacked a focus. It's like these episodes were fun to write. I thought they were entertaining. I was mining this very useful material from real life, but the book was not really going anywhere. So I set it aside. And then real life intervened, and for about 16 years, I didn't touch it. Now, after I almost won that short story contest, I thought, maybe I should go back and finish the novel I started. And there were other factors too. For instance, I started writing my blog in 2018, and that really got my writing muscles exercised and wanting to do a larger project. So in 2019, I took out this old manuscript that I'd been working on. It was half a novel, as I said, approximately. And I decided to finish it. And themes and ideas and characters became clearer in the course of that. And I was writing it during the fall and winter, and I finished it early in 2020, just before COVID hit us. And essentially, the novel I'm playing on the theme of realism versus idealism, which is, I've got two characters, Eric and Evan. I gave them both four-letter names starting with E as a way of underscoring their similarity in terms of background, but their approaches to life are completely different. Eric is a realist to the point of being cynical and detached and sort of floating through life. Evan is an idealist who really wants to make a mark on the world. So I track their adventures in the Chicago area in 1998. That's when the book is set. I used 1998 because, well, first of all, when I started writing the book, it was just a few years beyond that point. But also because I have a very good, clear memory of that time and where I was and what I was doing, so I could recreate it well. I used the Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky scandal as a kind of timeline for it. That's an event that keeps dropping in and out, sort of in the background of the book. And also, I think from our current point of view, there's a certain irony to it, because I think a lot of people nowadays tend to look back at the 90s as a sort of lost era of peace and prosperity and fun, and this feeling of, the end of history and everything's going to be good from now on. But then just a couple years later, the 9/11 attacks occurred, and there was the disputed election of 2000, and there was all this, the wars and all this stuff going on. And so I'm looking back at it and I'm saying, people in the 90s had a lot of the same problems that they still have today. There's anxiety about unemployment, about, there's status anxiety, there's this whole question of what you should do with your life, feelings of alienation and so forth. And I explore all of these things.
So with your characters and the backdrop of Chicago, backdrop of 1998, the Clinton era. And by the way, I was living in Chicago. That I was, as you were saying, 1998. I'm thinking, okay, where was I? Where was I living? What was I doing? The 90s were, there was stuff going on, undercurrents. I mean, it was not looking back, it's like, oh, we should have seen the writing on the wall that we're going to have this major financial meltdown. How would these protagonists, were they beginning to be affected by, the technology is starting to mushroom and take over ever more parts of our lives and even affect how we do our work. What we did back in 1998 may not even have been a job anymore in 2000 because it got automated or outsourced somewhere. So how did these two protagonists, how were their views different from each other?
Well, it's going back to the, sort of the basic issue here, realism versus idealism. Eric, the realist, is in his mid-30s, and his basic attitude is that, yeah, I could change this job for something else, but whatever I do is likely to be just about as unrewarding as what I'm doing now. So he doesn't feel any incentive to make a major change in his life. He prefers to just, wallow in his apartment, watching movies and spinning old records and just generally getting, as much enjoyment out of life as he can. As for Evan, he's a much younger guy. He's a college dropout who has felt the pressure of growing up in this pressurized suburban environment where you're supposed to achieve, and you're supposed to go to the best college and so forth. And he's alienated from that and trying to make a mark on the world in his own way. He's writing a philosophical treatise, but while to support himself, he lives in a cheap apartment. He does basic jobs that he creates himself, like shoveling snow for money or working at a temp agency. So for him, work is just a means of support while he works on his philosophical treatise and tries to change the world while he's doing so. So they're both alienated from work but in different ways.
Not to necessarily put you on the spot, Scott, but who did you align with more, or was it a little bit of each protagonist?
Well, I have to say, while in the making of these characters, I drew on personal experiences, both my own and those of other people. But of course, they're all modified for purposes of the story. I do think I'm naturally more inclined to Eric the realist's point of view. But I do also have to stress, there's an age difference between these two guys of about 15 years, and it's possible that the idealist could turn into the realist as he gets older.
What I find is interesting is today, 2021. So I do a lot of career coaching, career development coaching, and and I had a client yesterday who was just working. And she wanted something different, but she didn't go out and do anything about it. When there's a job, when there's an opportunity for a promotion if she says no, it's like, well, why are we keeping you around here?
Yeah.
And so I think I'm curious today in 2021, which one of these characters would have survived?
That's a good question. And I'm going to say, given circumstances today, I think Evan, the idealist, would actually be doing better based on a decision he might have made in the last chapter of the book. However, I'm not going to tell you what he did. You'll have to read it to find out.
All right. So to our listeners, you got to go read the book. Okay. You got to read the book. Looking back now, the journey of writing this book and this long gap between when you first were creating these little stories or episodes, and now you've brought this book together. What has changed about you as an individual, professional, entrepreneur, writer in this journey of being now a published novelist? What's changed about you?
Well, in the book, Eric the realist has what we call a problem of commitment. He doesn't want to commit to anything with implications of permanence. I was sort of like that when I started the book. I was bouncing around. Since then, a lot has happened. I got married, for instance, right, which I never thought was going to happen. I'm a homeowner. And I'm responsible for finding my own work in a way that I previously wasn't. So I've taken on a lot of commitments, and I think that's the big thing that has changed in my life.
And by the way, speaking of the commitments, and I have to, from my own perspective, I would equate myself more with Evan as well, because I woke up in a hotel room one day and it said, this is just not working. I can't do this for the rest of my life. And so I definitely appreciate, the Evan perspective, and it's actually refreshing to hear how you have changed as well and how that informed the writing. Where do you see now this journey of being an author, and, do you see other novels, in your future? Is this the one and done? I've done it. Now it's off my bucket list. I'm going to go off and do some other exciting things. Or do you have more novels in your back pocket?
Very interesting question, because I'm not really able to give a definitive answer at this point, but I have to say my head is buzzing with ideas. I'm wondering what I should do for a follow-up project, and I do have some ideas. I would like maybe to write another novel, but also to get back into shorter forms a bit. For instance, I think the novella is a great form, or a short novel. And unfortunately, it's been sort of overlooked in the history of publishing because it's hard to market such things. But I would like to give a shot at writing novellas or long short stories. I'm also toying with the idea of a photo novel, by which I mean, I have a photographer friend. He's actually the guy who took the cover photo for Abandon All Hope. And we're thinking of doing a book where I would supply the text and he would supply the photographs. And it might be some kind of post-apocalyptic end of civilization kind of story. But right now I'm just thinking about that. But and there's nonfiction I would like to write. I'm already doing this in short form on my blog. The blog is a good way to get some writing practice, put some ideas down for things which might become larger pieces in the future. So yeah, I definitely see myself as continuing to write into the future.
Sure. How do reviews, whether in the blog comments or the book itself, it's available on a variety of, book buying platforms. as you get reviews and perspectives from other readers, how is that informing your writing?
Well, right now I don't have any reviews because the book was just released,
Right.
like just a few days ago. So it's going to be a while before I get that kind of feedback. So that's that's wide open. That's part of the fun. I'm curious to see what people will say about it. Of course, I hope it's positive, but even if it's negative, it might be useful. Constructive criticism. We'll see. I'm just really curious to find out.
Okay. Now, when you are not writing and taking care of Max there, how are you and your wife kind of enjoying hopefully post-COVID, soon to be post-COVID, but what do you do for fun when you're not sitting down at the computer writing?
Well, we live in the wonderful town of Lake Bluff, Illinois, right on the shore of Lake Michigan. It's a very beautiful traditional town, and we do a lot of local activities. We like to take long walks along the lakefront with the dog. Then we go to our award-winning local brew pub. I do a lot of cooking. My wife does the commute, and I stay at home, so I've got access to the kitchen. So we have actually a rather idyllic life here, COVID or no COVID. And I have to say that, this summer has been really, really nice. We did all the things we enjoy doing. We had concerts, we had art fairs, we had restaurants, everything that we like to do. And granted, in summer, the infection rates were really low, but it felt almost normal, and I felt good about that. I have to say that as things currently stand, we personally are not really affected by COVID that much. Yeah, yes, now we have to put a mask in when we go in the store or the library or whatever, but that's a minor imposition. So it certainly does feel like we're getting back to normal, at least where we are. We had a really good summer, as opposed to last year, which just felt, well, you know how it felt. I don't have to tell.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Scott, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, the blog, etc., where are the best places for them to go?
Well, the best place is my website, which contains the blog, and that is sort of a clearinghouse for me. I mean, if you're a potential client looking for translation work, you should go there too, because I discuss my services on that website. But I've had the blog for 3 years now, and I update that fairly regularly. So you should go to swspires.weebly.com.
Excellent. Yeah, we will provide the backlinks to the website as well. And really, if you want to shout out to the brew pub, we'll be happy to provide a backlink to them, if anybody wants to go visit Lake Bluff.
Yeah, it's Lake Bluff Brewing Company, it's called.
That's easy.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you, so I lived in Chicago. Have you ever been to Hopleaf?
I don't think so. Is it the one in, there's one in Rogers Park, and I think there's another in Wicker Park or something. Am I?
Hopleaf is in Andersonville, like in Foster and Clark area. So
okay, I'm misremembering it then.
Yeah, I'm a Belgian
might
beer
have
kind
been
of
there.
guy. I'm a Belgian beer.
We go to brew pubs all the time, and we like to do driving vacations, which are often based around what breweries and wineries we can visit.
I think that's pretty cool. I do that around coffee shops, so especially roasters. So, but I love that. I love that. Scott, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the author series on the Success Inside podcast. I know this is probably one of your first podcasts you have been involved with, so I hope this was a pleasant experience for you. It's a great conversation to learn more about you and the book, Abandon All Hope, and hope you enjoyed yourself.
I certainly did, Howard. Thanks for having me on.
Fantastic. And best wishes for the book. And of course, we're going to provide the backlink again to your website, swspires.weebly.com. And we'll also provide backlinks to some of the book buying sites so they can pick up Abandon All Hope. I love that title. And
it's a little ironic.
It's a little ironic. I think there is hope, though. I mean, I often ask my guests, do you have hope? And, I think, again, why I liked Evan, life's changing and you have to adapt. If you don't adapt, then life happens to you. And
yes, exactly.
All right. Well, once again, thank you. And we look forward to hearing more about your future successes and with obviously the success for Abandon All Hope.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, folks, we have just been chatting with Scott Spires. He's a translator, linguist, writer, editor, a Chicagoland native, and he is the author of Abandon All Hope. Definitely go take a look at this book and enjoy it. It's a great upcoming holiday reading. Okay, and there's a lot going on in the news, and what better way to kind of take a break from the media and enjoy a nice book, sitting down with your favorite craft beer, or if it's me, a nice iced espresso. So check out Scott's webpage. We'll provide the backlink there, as well as to the link to the book buying site so you can pick up your copy of Abandon All Hope. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the author series on the Success Insight podcast. You can find us on successinsightpodcast.com. We are also on Facebook and on LinkedIn on our Success Insight podcast pages, as well as the major podcasting platforms, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast. We're on Audible, and you can also find us on Spotify, where this episode with Scott will be organized within our author series. So you can listen to this episode as well as to, episodes with our other authors. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. Take care of yourselves, your family. Wear your mask if it makes sense. Practice social distancing if it makes sense. But above all, take care of yourself and the community. All right, we'll see you in another episode of the author series on the Success Insight podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.